First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. We've got apologies for Councillor Anderson. Second item on the agenda, declarations of interest. Are there any? None. Move on to the third item on the agenda, which is investment for the future reserve, initial utilisation proposals. And this report is going to be taken by
Margaret.
Margaret. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. This report aims to agree the criteria for utilisation of the Council's new investment in the future reserve. That reserve was set up to hold funds of around 6.3 million a year in both 24/5 and 25/6, and these became available due to a temporary reduction in the employer's contributions to the Strathclyde Pension Fund. When we were setting our budget in 24/5, the Council forecast budget gaps of about £15 million for 25/6 and £5 million each year for the next 2 years. So while some of the investment in the future reserve may have to be used to help address these short-term budget pressures and allow time to put in place some future recurring savings plans, the intention is that a lot of this fund will be able to be used to support delivery of the Council's vision for the future. The Cross-Party Budget Strategy Group has considered how the reserve might best be used to benefit the Council, and paragraph 7 of the report sets out 4 proposals.
Should we pause for a minute while we try to sort out this beeping noise in the background?
Maybe Andrew's trying to get it.
I wouldn't have thought so. Margaret, if you'd like to continue, thank you.
Okay, I had mentioned that the Cross-Party Budget Strategy Group had considered how the reserve might be used to benefit the Council in the coming years, and paragraph 7 of the report today sets out the 4 proposed criteria for accessing the fund. So these are listed, as I say, in paragraph 7 of the report. Paragraph 8 and Annex 1 of the report then go on to set out the first tranche of projects recommended for support from the fund, and further reports will come back to Cabinet as new spending proposals are developed. So today we're just asking the Cabinet to agree the utilisation criteria for the fund, to note the potential applications of the reserve, agree the initial projects to be supported, so those are the ones that are in paragraph 8 and the annex, and note that we'll bring further reports back to the Cabinet on future proposals, and there are a number of the CMT here to answer any questions on the individual proposals that are there today.
We got there. Thank you very much, Margaret. Any questions? Councillor Pragnell.
I'm fully supportive of this paper. I think the criteria sets out what we're aiming to do with this fund. I think given tight financial situation all councils are in, we are in a very fortunate position that we've been able to benefit from the Strathclyde Pension Fund. I know that other councils that don't pay into this fund are not getting this allocated money. So it is welcomed in financial times, and I do agree with the criteria. Looking at the projects, investment to save in the future, I think that's where we should be going, and I look forward to more proposals coming to Cabinet in the next couple of months, and also to acknowledge all those who are on the Budget Strategy Group and the cross-party work on this, and the great discussions we've had around this proposal. So thanks to all involved with that as well.
Councillor Devlin, are you okay? I'd just like to echo Councillor Pragnell's point. I warmly welcome this paper. And in particular, I would like to thank officers and members of the Budget Strategy Group for the consideration of these proposals and the rationale in April, and the consensus we reached on how best to utilise the opportunities to invest for the future. This is a unique opportunity for the Council to invest for the future, and I think we've got a good range of packages in front of us today. I'm happy to approve those. So with that, are we happy to approve the paper? Thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the local item number 4, Local Governance Benchmarking Framework 22-23 Performance. And Stephen, are you talking to this? Jamie Reid's talking to this. Thanks, Jamie.
Good morning. Members will be aware that this is the annual consideration of the Local Government Benchmarking Framework, which gives a high-level overview of comparative performance across over 100 indicators relating to local government. The Local Government Benchmarking Framework is a high-level benchmarking tool. It's not a league table, it's a can opener for discussions around the variations in costs and areas for improvement that various councils face. The timescale that we're looking at here, as always, is slightly delayed, so it's covering the year 22-23. So again, there will be developments on the ground that have since replaced some of the data that's been reported on today. However, it is a useful tool to help us understand some of the comparative issues that have been faced across the country and how they relate to East Renfrewshire. You'll also be aware that there are a number of annexes in this report. The first focuses on comparing 22-23 with the previous year and performance against the Scottish average and ranking changes, and the second annex compares with the pre-COVID position in 1920 and any rank changes that are greater or equal to 5 places. The report also summarises the national overview, which has identified 5 key pressures that local government are facing around local government finance and workforce pressures, poverty and financial hardship and the cost of living crisis, health and social care pressures, education, and the overall challenges maintaining the performance of local government services. The report captures well, I think, the pressures that we would all recognise as an organisation, and it's heartening to report that overall East Renfrewshire's performance has broadly been maintained in really challenging circumstances. The Council has performed better than the Scottish average on 64 or 61 indicators of the measures, 64%, sorry, or 61 indicators within the measures, whilst it was below the Scottish average on 34 measures. Overall, this is a largely comparable but small reduction on last year, where it was 67 and 33% respectively. So key areas of performance are organised by service are listed in the report, and where performance has declined significantly, further information has been given, and there are colleagues from across key services here today to give any insight that members may request. So it's recommended that Cabinet scrutinise the performance against the comparative information and consider whether any aspects of the Council's performance is in need of further exploration, that's my piece here. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Councillor Pragnell.
I noticed on section 9 of the report on the service satisfaction data, I appreciate in paragraph 9 you've explained about the sampling size with our citizens panel data and the Scottish Household Survey, but can you just confirm that the Scottish Household Survey, because if we look at the proportion of adults satisfied with local schools, it's different to our data, can you just confirm that those who are surveyed via the Scottish Household Survey might not necessarily use these services, or therefore don't really know how they're comparing until other areas? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the case. So the citizens panel is a better source of information, and there is a lot more rigour provided in terms of the local sample size, the diversity of that matching our population. So local citizens panel gives us a much better position, whereas the Scottish Household Survey is a more generic survey piece with a smaller sample size for East Renfrewshire that is obviously less rigorously modelled to the local area.
Thanks for confirming that, Jamie. I just want to make sure it's transparent and members of the public are aware of this. On to Annex 1, I'm just looking at the I think this is one for Leslie. The gross cost of children looked after in residential-based services per child per week is the low. It's kind of ranked 32 in Scotland. Can you maybe explain why that is?
Thank you, Councillor Pragnell. We do recognise that the cost is high for residential childcare services. Partly that's market factors in terms of the framework rates that we use for such provision. We have higher costs in some areas because we don't have any internal residential units for younger people within East Renfrewshire. So it does mean that when we do have to buy that level of care, it's dependent on the market conditions at the time. We also have quite a number of children who have got some fairly complex needs, and again, the higher the level of need, the higher the cost per week can be.
And I really...
Sorry, Councillor Pragnell, I think Chief Executive would like to come in on this point.
Thanks. Just to add to Leslie's remarks, Councillor, there is also what we have to be show some caution over. We have got a relatively small amount of children in residential placements, and therefore 1 or 2 placements can significantly change the average cost. For example, you could have a child with significant need, and a placement can be upwards of £8,000–9,000 a week. Now, if that's one child and you've only got 3 or 4 children in residential, of course that will significantly change the average cost. So I think we have to be careful because it's such a small sample size, which is testimony to the work of the partnership in respect that they do everything to keep children where it is safe to do so in their own homes or indeed with their families. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And similarly, I had a question about the gross cost of children looked after in the community setting. And again, I recognise that's because of low numbers, but if there's any additional information, and I know certainly with our asylum-seeking children, a couple of years ago there was a lack of in-house foster carers. So has that maybe kind of contributed to this? I know now we've had a great recruitment campaign, but could that be to do with those who are looked after in the community sector?
Thanks, Councillor Pragnell. Picking up on Chief Executive's comments in the previous question, the focus within East Renfrewshire is trying to maintain children living with families in the family setting as much as we possibly can, and that helps prevent that very high level cost in terms of residential care. There's been a modest cost increase from the previous benchmarking of £16 a week, and I think that does recognise that we do try and pay rates that to foster kinship carers that will allow that to be an attractive option, particularly when we're benchmarking that against our local neighbours. We also do purchase intensive family support when we need to, and again that's very much about trying to keep families together and prevent that move to residential placement. I think the other point that I would recognise, as well as those small numbers can cause a significant fluctuation in terms of the average cost, I think it's also worth noting that the cost per child, when we look at our family group, we are actually lower than the family group average as well.
Okay. Councillor Devlin, are you okay?
Yeah.
If I can come in then. You want more?
Under the corporate services section, I noticed the gender pay gap is on average 2.50% in Scotland, and although we have an improving data here, do we know what more can be done and why that the reason for that?
I'll have a go. It's a complex area, I'll be honest, it's not the easiest one to explain. The gender pay gap compares the difference in the average hourly pay for male and female employees. In the data in front of you, you can see it says 4.6% for 22-23. It's actually 4.8% in 23-24. And that's based on East Renfrewshire's average hourly rates of pay. And our male employees are paid 4.8% more on average than our female employees. In monetary terms, that's about £1 an hour. Our average hourly rates for both male and female employees are some of the highest in Scotland across local government, but our average pay is influenced by changes in workforce. So specifically, 75% of our employees are female. So we have more female new starters each year in terms of, areas where there's higher turnover. For example, care professions, facilities management, these sorts of things. New starters join on the first point of a salary scale, and salaries increase with service. So every time you put someone back to that bottom point, again, it impacts this, and that's what's driving some of the gap. Differences between East Renfrewshire Council and other councils can be caused by a range of factors, including the distribution of females compared to males within grades across the council, salary scales, and also employee length of service. In East Ren, the main reason for the pay gap is a higher percentage of women in lower graded posts, rather than it being about a higher number of men in high graded posts. There are also some more males at the top of the pay scales because of longer service. They stay in those jobs and the turnover is not quite the same, or placement at a higher point of the scale as a new start if they'd had evidence of a previous higher salary elsewhere. And there are pay gaps in teaching as well as local government. So I think it really is just about the makeup of our workforce, that we monitor this really closely, we look at it right across all the areas. It doesn't just affect women, there are some parts of our workforce where males are affected by this as well, but in terms of our salaries, our average salaries are amongst the highest in Scotland. So, thanks.
You finished, Councillor Pragnell. If I could come in now. So warmly welcome this report. This is a very important annual report that gives officers and members the opportunity to compare our performance with the rest of Scotland, and Cabinet treats it very seriously. And I appreciate the separate briefings we've had on some of the detail on this, with 2 separate briefings we've had with officers on this, which helped on understanding of some of the measures that are in the tables today. Once again, this is an excellent report and very reassuring to Cabinet, and shows that East Renfrewshire is again one of the top performing councils in Scotland with outstanding performance, particularly in education. There are a few points that I'd like to pull out. There's an apparent contradiction in the papers when we look at poverty attainment gap and how that compares nationally. But I would like to draw attention to the performance of our children in quintile 1, which are those from the most deprived areas. Their achievement in points, in terms of adding up all their grades, is on par with the average in Scotland for those in quintile 4. That is exceptional. That is an outstanding achievement. But there is a contradiction with the poverty attainment gap, which doesn't look as if it's closing as quickly as perhaps in other nations. So I wonder if Mark would like to talk to that and perhaps explain the points differential and what that actually means to our children.
Thank you, Leader. So in terms of the points one that you've referenced, that's on page 11 of the papers, and the final sort of 6 measures there set out the position of our young people by the time they leave school in terms of their overall, I suppose, basket of attainment. And you can see all our young people, whichever kind of quintile they come from, perform exceptionally well. Our aim is always, our ambition is to be the highest performing council in all of those. So we're not satisfied that in terms of quintile 1, we're sitting at rank 2. We would like to be the highest performing in all of those areas. And essentially that is our strategy. It's about raising the bar for all, and at the same time making sure that those in quintile 1 or free school meals, we're raising the bar faster for them than we are for quintile 5. You reference on page 12, I suppose, the kind of gap measures, which are the ones that we've highlighted in a number of ways through Education Committee, through some of the presentations. So as Jamie said, this report always comes with that time lag. It's 22-23's data. But essentially the literacy attainment gap and the numeracy attainment gap, you can see there, is quite large. And it shows our rank is 25th and 26th, which is not where we would want it to be. But effectively the gap there is made up of the difference between quintile 1 and quintile 5 learners. And that's there's a complexity or a nuance to that, in that when we look at local authorities that perhaps got the lowest gap and have reduced it, they don't necessarily have the highest performance for quintile 1 and quintile 5. And our ambition is obviously to reduce that gap, but also to make sure everybody is doing better. So in terms of those gaps, our learners, say for literacy, our quintile 5 learners are ranked top for literacy and numeracy. We sit 9th for literacy for quintile 1. So that is where our sort of focused work is, on supporting our teachers with their assessment judgments, supporting the pedagogical approaches in terms of literacy and numeracy to raise that kind of bar, so that we can see those standards raised for all our learners. And I think there's a piece of work there in terms of consistency and making sure that that understanding of the standards, because for Curriculum for Excellence, that's based on a teacher judgment. The ones you referenced earlier, Leader, are basically through the SQA exams, and so there's a difference in methodology there. And what we want to do is make sure there's that kind of consistent picture. It's an area of focus, you'll know, from Education Committee, and be happy to continue to bring back more reports on that.
Thanks, Mark, for clarifying that position and explaining the apparent contradiction in some of the numbers, which is very, very helpful. Just on this point, on the points gap differential. So if we look at quintile 1, what does that mean in terms of extra grades that they would be achieving in East Renfrewshire compared to the Scottish average? I think it's a couple of 100 points higher.
Yeah, so I mean, quintile 1, our learners in 2022-23 had an average kind of basket of points from all their exams of 1,037. The national average is 658, and if to give you a kind of indication, a national 5A is 84 points. So it gives you just a kind of sense of that, there are a number of whole qualifications ahead in terms of that comparison.
That's very helpful, because no one understands points, but they'll understand A grades and B grades and stuff like that. So that's a huge difference compared to the Scottish average. So thanks for clarifying that. Separately, I think it was very important to, again, the apparent contradictions on the citizens panel with the Scottish survey, particularly on education and leisure and libraries, which did not make sense with all of the internal data that we've received regularly on this. So thanks for clarifying that, Jamie. Final point for me is really on costs per kilometre of road. That's one of the lowest ranks in Scotland, and actually we're spending almost double the Scottish average. However, that is a deliberate choice by this council to increase investment in roads. So I wonder if Andy could clarify that.
Yeah, the indicator is the direct sum of your capital and your revenue investment against your kilometres of road. So obviously the more you spend, the worse the indicator's effectively going to become, but it shows the level of investment from this council in the roads that you could argue should be maybe up the other side of the table rather than the bottom side of the table.
I think that's right. It's an investment criteria rather than disinvestment. So I think you're probably right. So thanks for that clarification, Andy. So if there's no other points, are we happy to approve this report? Approved. So thank you very much. So if we move on to the next item of the agenda, which is item number 5, COVID Reserve, Progress and Impact of Fund, and this will be taken by Julie Breslin. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. So today's paper provides Cabinet with a final update on the impact of humanitarian projects funded by COVID reserves in the 2023-2024 financial period. From October 2022, a total of £4.69 million has been approved by Cabinet to support the delivery of humanitarian support across a number of areas, including direct financial support, advice and support services, mental health and wellbeing recovery, community capacity building and organisational recovery. The primary focus of these funds has been to provide support with COVID recovery, and this has also included mitigating some of the cost of living pressures that have been exacerbated through the pandemic. Annex 1, which is also summarised in paragraph 9, presents a summary of all funded projects and the impact made during the 23-24 financial year. So some of the highlights there include over 1.7 million in financial gains and the consolidation of over 1.5 million financial debt for 2,583 clients who accessed East Renfrewshire Citizens Advice Bureau. The humanitarian project funding allowed East Renfrewshire CAB to recruit an additional 5 posts, including an older person's advisor, who were able to deliver that support. During winter just gone there, 29 community groups were funded to support residents through providing food, warmth and wellbeing activities. This included the Fairweather Drop-In to support minority ethnic older adults, Eaglesham and Waterford Community Larder and Thornybank Seniors Club to support with additional opening hours and the associated costs with that. Barhead Housing Association supported 53 households with financial assistance, and a further 36 East Renfrewshire Council housing tenants were supported to sustain their tenancies, amongst other housing related support. 225 carers were given additional support via the EOR Carers Centre to alleviate the pressures they were experiencing, and 85 community projects were funded through a participatory budgeting voting process across 6 communities, and there was also an additional green PB project, so that really expanded the community capacity work that happened post-COVID. Several projects will continue into 24-25, in particular those that are aligned with term time and youth services provision. Back in November, Cabinet had agreed to use any remaining underspend from humanitarian projects to alleviate HSCP in-year budget pressures, and this is sitting at just over 130,000. So today, Cabinet is asked to note the impact made by humanitarian projects in 2023-2024 from COVID reserves funding, note the outstanding projects that will continue into 24-25, and approve an uncommitted balance of £131,672 to be transferred to HSCP to assist with in-year budget pressures and COVID-related impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Any comments? Councillor Bragg?
Thank you for bringing this paper with the updates and the progress made. I think it's clear from this paper, it spells out how many people in East Renfrewshire have been supported for these funds and the various projects. And I think it's pretty incredible, just looking at one statistic, 124 children, young people and children have received one support in numeracy and maths. I think that's pretty incredible, and that impact going forward will stick with them. Similarly, the success of giving more funding to CAB, 170 clients with financial gains, is pretty incredible. And I think as a council we've really used these funds and utilised them to the best of our ability, and they have had an impact. So I just want to praise all those involved in coming up with the proposals, and look forward to see the results of those projects that are carrying on into the next year because of term time. But thank you all for your hard work, and it's really appreciated, and I'm sure the residents appreciate the support they've been given as well.
I'd just like to echo those comments. I think this is a very helpful paper of record, really, in terms of the impact of the positive interventions during the cost of living crisis. So I really appreciate we have this. This is something we can go back to in future, hopefully not that often, to look at interventions, what works and what we could do more of. So it's very, very helpful to have this permanent record. I would also like to just point out the impact of the income generation work that we've done for our residents, and it's not just CAB. Mark have had a big part to play in that as well. Debt consolidation, so which has a lasting impact. But in terms of the income generation, it's an ongoing benefit to those residents, and that doesn't go away. That is recurring income for future years as well, which will be most welcome to those residents and to the broader economy of East Renfrewshire. So I'd just like to point out that and thank everyone. This has been a huge effort by officers in the Council and HSCP. You can tell by the variety and depth of programmes. It's impacted all areas of the Council, and I really appreciate the work that everyone has put into this to make this as effective as possible. And on behalf of the residents, I'd like to thank all officers for the work they've done to address the cost of living crisis that our residents have been facing. So thank you with that. And with that, are we happy to approve the report? Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 6, Domestic Abuse Council Housing Policy, and this report will be taken by Suzanne.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet approval for the new domestic abuse housing policy to a sensitive approach to finding suitable housing solutions for council tenants that are victims of domestic abuse. Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018 came into force in April 2019. The Act created a new statutory offence of engaging in a course of behaviour which is abusive of a partner or ex-partner. East Renfrewshire Council have always supported those fleeing domestic abuse by using the duties set out in the Housing Scotland Act 1957, which for us is through our homeless services. However, with the introduction of this Act, we felt it's appropriate to introduce a policy to complement this legislation. In the past, those fleeing domestic abuse have always been encouraged to present to the local authority to keep us homeless. Well, for some, this is the answer they're looking for. For many, that can be a traumatic and daunting experience, particularly those with children. They have to move school, they have to move away from support networks, and often creates a more uncertain time for them. And what we found is, what we fear, is that often victims may stay with the perpetrator rather than go through the disruption of moving home. Over 20% of applications for homelessness in East Renfrewshire are a result of domestic dispute within the household, which is violent or abusive, and it's the main reason for women in East Renfrewshire present as homeless to the council. The policy sets out to offer victims of domestic abuse choice in how we can address their housing situation. With support from housing services, tenants of victims of domestic abuse, we assist them to make informed choices about how we resolve the situation. This includes installing safety measures into their home, or it can be looking at wider housing options, yes, a council housing, but private sector housing, and a range of options. In order to put this process in place, we are introducing an implementation plan which we developed to ensure that the policy is embedded across the whole of housing services and the Violence Against Women's Partnership. And this will include a broad review of staff training to ensure that all staff involved are prepared to support tenants and residents who face this situation. It's recommended that Cabinet consider and approve for adoption the domestic abuse policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Councillor Pragnell.
Just on the point of training, I completely agree that all those involved in this service should get appropriate training. But how regularly will this be? So I know we have a turnover of staff, they might not necessarily have gone through it, so would it be yearly, 6 monthly? Is there any plans for that? And also my other question is, do other local authorities have these policies? And how does this compare to maybe neighbouring local authorities that maybe have a similar demographic to us?
In terms of training, that's something we're working through with the Violence Against Women's Partnership about what that training will look like, who will provide it, and how often we want to put it in place. So I can give more details once we have that agreed. In terms of other councils, some other councils already have these policies, some don't. I can come back to you around some of our neighbouring local authorities, but yes, it's a mixed bag in terms of who does and doesn't have this policy.
Suggest as councillors there should be training for those violence against women training. I know I've been through it a bit in previous jobs, but I think it's really important that elected members, if they're presented with a case, know how to deal with that. So is that something maybe Chief Executive we could take forward as a council?
Absolutely, Councillor. As part of the wider elected member training, which we put together and continue to try and enhance, we're always open to suggestions that would enhance members' knowledge, skills and experience. So I think that's a more than reasonable suggestion to put forward, and we'll action that.
Councillor
It's not technically correct. The situation we face is that we have a huge demand for temporary accommodation, and the reality is, if any household presents today, they're likely to get hotel accommodation initially. In terms of moving families from that accommodation, we will always prioritise people in hotels before anyone else to get temporary flats. So, although we're not saying you have to go into hotel accommodation, given the demand, every new flat that comes up, we will go to the hotels first before we will give that to someone who presents newly that day. We also have a policy that as soon as a flat becomes available, families with children are prioritised to get those flats before anyone else. So it is a really difficult situation.
I understand that, and there's no criticism here. The basic point I'm making, we've not got enough properties for homeless priorities, right? Now, some of these families are through horrific conditions with domestic abuse. Now, we're talking about families here, we're not talking an individual. And these kids are getting taken out of their home, they're settled home they've had for so many years. You know, their first port of call is getting put into a hotel, you know, one-room hotel, and they could be there for 6 or 7 weeks before they get temporary accommodation. It's unacceptable, and we need to look more in depth to see how we can eradicate that, to make sure that in the domestic abuse cases get a family, there'll be temporary accommodation out there for them, not hotel accommodation.
It's something we're working to. In the past 3 years, we've doubled the number of properties we use for temporary accommodation, and we'll continue to do so because of the demand, but I absolutely accept your point.
We also remember that the cost of this
we do a regular advertisement on the council's social media pages for private landlords that are wanting to work with us. We'll continue to do that, but there has been no demand, and that's the problem. Yeah, the private sector in East Renfrewshire is very, very competitive and booming, so there's not really a benefit to landlords to come to the council because they can let their properties very, very easily, and that's a challenge for us.
Thanks, Councillor Devlin, for raising that very important point, and I think it's been made very well, and we look forward to seeing progress on that area.
I think, sorry, just before I finish, there's a lot of undesirables within these hotels, as we know, and it's not a great environment for any child.
That is our current policy, but the demand means that sometimes it's unavoidable. We do try and move them out as quickly as we can.
Where did that policy come from, Suzanne?
It's an internal policy because we didn't want to prioritise, say, single applicants when there's a family in a hotel.
Should that not come up through a cabinet paper or what?
We can bring it to cabinet and we can get that reviewed.
Stephen, do you like to comment?
Can I just clarify, Councillor, what it is you want to bring to cabinet? Because I think, as Suzanne had alluded to, obviously our first priority is to take families out of hotel accommodation into temporary accommodation. That already is our priority. So
it's not happening.
Yeah, but I'm asking what you want to bring to cabinet, because why it's not happening is we don't necessarily have enough temporary accommodation.
Well, I have never heard of a policy within the council saying that you must take hotel accommodation before you can.
Can I come back? Yeah. That isn't the policy, but the reality is that when a temporary flat comes up, we will go to the hotels first because people shouldn't be in hotels, so they will get prioritised. Within that, we will always seek to take families out the hotels before single applicants come out. So we don't have a policy to say you have to go into bed and breakfast, but the reality of the situation is that we've so many people in bed and breakfast, they have to be prioritised before anyone else that comes in. But to give you an example, if a property comes available this afternoon and we have all single people in hotels and a family comes in, we will give it to the family, absolutely. That will always be the case. With that, will always be prioritised for temporary accommodation, but the reality is, because of the demand, there are times when unavoidably they have to go into hotels, and we're trying our best to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of these families don't want to go into hotels.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Devlin, and thanks for the clarifications. Are we happy to approve this report as is? So, agreed. So thank you very much. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 7, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, Glasgow City Region, and this will be taken by Michaela Sullivan. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you, Leader. The City Region PMO has been working with the authorities towards a shared electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The aim is to let a commercial contract to an operator to develop an effective network across the City Region. Collaboration is considered beneficial for all authorities. The PMO has asked for all 8 authorities' cabinets to endorse the approach and also to pool their electric vehicle charging infrastructure funding from Transport Scotland to support the development of the proposal. The full timetable to installation is set out in the report, but at this stage we are not committing to anything other than the development of the proposal. There will be further reports once there is an outcome of the tendering exercise. If you are in agreement, you are being asked to approve the work to tender for a partner in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and in principle inter-authority agreement, the use of our electric vehicle infrastructure fund resources from Transport Scotland to develop the proposal, and finally a reassurance that you will be instructing us to keep you up to date on any developments within this area, and if there are any changes or future financial implications, we will bring those back as a priority.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Any questions on this? Thanks, Michaela. This has been discussed at Glasgow City Region for a good couple of years now. I'm glad we've got to a position where we're looking at collaboration across all authorities rather than East Renfrewshire trying to do something on their own, which frankly we don't have the resources to do, and we probably wouldn't get as good a commercial deal as we would by negotiating it on a regional basis. So I really welcome this report, and thank you for presenting it. Are we happy to agree this report? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is it Michaela again, with neighbourhood traffic management zones. Thank you.
Thank you. This report provides an update on progress with neighbourhood traffic management zones, which you approved back in August 2023. There are 74 potential zones to be rolled out over a 5-year period. The first 15 zones identified are now the subject of an open consultation on the Commonplace website, which is closing on the 23rd of June. Participatory budgeting will be used to identify the projects that can be implemented from those suggested by the residents. It should be noted that at this point, although Transport Scotland are likely to award us annual funding, this hasn't been confirmed. We have also applied to Sustrans for £60,000 for the development of a future strategy across all the remaining zones and are awaiting a response. You are asked to note progress and also to agree to the acceptance of the Sustrans funding if it is awarded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Pragnell.
I noticed that the zones proposed for this current year are those that are primarily around schools, which I think should be the priority. However, I know from the Netherley and Stamperland Community Council they're a wee bit disappointed that the area in Netherley around the school wasn't included. I understand that's quite complex because it is a main road, whereas if you look at other areas, certainly around Busby Central, they're kind of more residential and they don't have a main road running through them. So it was just to get clarity when that area of Netherley and Netherley will be looked at. Will it be in phase 2 or just so residents are aware that is coming? But I understand that because this is new, that maybe dealing with this kind of more simple ones is maybe the route we're going down, because Netherley is more complex.
Can I ask John Marley to answer that question, please? Because he's been involved in the detail more than me.
Netherley Primary School you mentioned in particular. Yeah, so that's, as we know, is in Clarkson Road. We're kind of, because it is a kind of bit of a trial, we're still waiting for feedback to see what kind of responses we get and how we deal with that and how we prioritise the next batch. That will all feed into that. But I suppose a wee bit of good news about the Netherlee case is that because it's on that 30 mile an hour zone, and we also have government policy to reduce all residential streets to 20 mile an hour, part of that consideration will be looking at Clarkson Road and reduce it 20 locally, potentially over the length of the frontage of the shops and the school. So I'm sure that's something that the school community would welcome.
Welcome this report. Thanks very much, Michaela. I'm absolutely delighted that we're finally getting out to consultation. I think we have to acknowledge that it's been a bit more complicated than we originally thought, and it's been a bit slower to get going. But I do know that there's a lot of interest from residents to get moving on this. So really looking forward to the first zones being worked on and seeing what the results are from that and learning from that to make sure that the rollout for all the other zones in East Renfrewshire is successful. So thank you very much for this paper. And if there's no other comments, are we happy to approve this report? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to the final item on the agenda, which is agenda item number 9, which is noting the minute of the Joint Consultative Committee first tier, and that is just for noting. Are we happy to note and agree that? Agreed. So that brings to an end our proceedings for today. Thank you very much for all your time. Thank you.